Welcome to Be Wise and Relax. Tonight you don't have to understand anything. You don't have to solve anything. There is nowhere else you need to be and nothing you need to figure out before morning. Wherever you are right now, lying in the dark, the weight of the day finally setting down, the room gone quiet around you. Let yourself settle in. Take a slow, deep breath. Let it fill you gently and let it go slower still. And if you feel like it, you can share what time it is and where you're listening from. It's a small comfort somehow to know there are others out there in the dark tonight listening to the same quiet voice. Thank you for joining us here. Let us begin. I want to tell you about a bet, a real one made between two real men a long time ago now. Picture a small wager between friends, the kind people make when they're so sure of something that they're willing to put a little skin in the game. Nothing dramatic. A case of fine wine. The kind of bet you'd make at a dinner table, leaning back in your chair, full of certainty. The year was 1998. One of the men was a neuroscientist named Christof Koch, a brilliant one, the sort of person who spends his life peering into the machinery of the brain, watching the cells fire, charting the storms of electricity that flicker behind your eyes. The other was a philosopher named David Chalmers, and the thing they were betting on was the deepest, strangest question a human being can ask. Koch bet Chalmers a case of fine wine that within 25 years, that is, by the year 2023, science would have explained consciousness, that we would have found it, that we would understand finally why there is a feeling of being you, here, inside your own head. 25 years is a long time. It's enough time to send children off to grow up, enough time for whole technologies to be born and grow old. And Koch had every reason to be confident. He worked at the cutting edge. He had the most powerful scanners ever built, machines that could watch a single thought ripple across the brain like a stone dropped in still water. He had, alongside him, some of the finest minds in the world. The arrow of progress only ever seemed to point one way, up, forward, toward more knowing, never less. Of course we would crack it. It was only a matter of time and better tools. So let me tell you what happened in 2023 when the 25 years were up. Koch paid the wine. He conceded the bet. He admitted publicly and graciously that he had lost. The mystery had not been solved. We had not explained consciousness. For all the scanners, for all the genius, for all the decades of careful work, the thing he had been so sure we would find had slipped through our fingers. He handed over the bottles, and in doing so, he handed over something far heavier. A quiet admission that the problem was bigger than he had ever imagined. Bigger, perhaps, than any of us imagined. Now, sit with that for a moment, because there's something deeply strange hidden inside it. We're used to a certain story about science. The story goes like this. Every year we know a little more. Every year the fog rolls back a little further. The mysteries of yesterday, what the stars are made of, why we get sick, how the heart pumps blood. These were once impossible riddles, and now they sit in school books for children. Knowledge accumulates, ignorance retreats. That's the story we tell, and it's mostly true. But here is the unsettling thing. With consciousness, the closer we look, the harder the question becomes. We have mapped the brain in more exquisite detail than Koch could have dreamed of in 1998. We can watch neurons fire in real time. We can trace pathways, name regions, light up the precise patch of tissue that flickers when you see a face or hear your name. The map has grown astonishingly detailed, and the map has only made the mystery sharper, not smaller. We are not closing in. If anything, we have walked closer and closer to the very edge of a cliff and discovered just how far down it goes. This is not a video about a problem we're about to solve. I want to be honest with you about that from the start. There's no triumphant answer waiting at the end of tonight, no neat little bow. What I can offer you instead is something rarer and, I think, gentler. The feeling of standing at the very edge of human understanding, in good company, and looking out at the one question that has humbled every single person who has ever turned to face it. There's a strange peace in that, I find. A peace in not having to fix the thing, just to look at it, to wonder. And here is where I want to turn it toward you, softly. Because you, lying there in the dark, are the proof. You are the evidence. You are the mystery itself. Think about it for just a moment, gently, no effort. Right now, there is a feeling of being you. There is something it is like to be lying there. You feel the weight of the blanket, the warmth of the room, or the cool of it. You hear my voice. Maybe there's a faint ache somewhere, or the soft heaviness of sleep beginning to gather at the edges of your thoughts. There is an inside to you, a light that is on, a felt sense of simply existing, of being aware, of being here at all. You have never, for 1 second of your waking life, doubted this. It is the most certain thing in your entire existence. You might doubt whether the world out there is real. You might doubt your own memories, your own name, whether you're dreaming. Philosophers have doubted all of those things and more, but the one thing you cannot doubt is that there is some experience happening right now, that the doubting itself feels like something. You are aware. Of all the things you know, this is the thing you know most surely. And here is the vertigo, the dizzying twist of it all. That one thing, the thing you are more certain of than anything else in the universe, is the one thing no one on earth can explain. No scientist, no philosopher, no genius with the finest scanner ever built. They cannot explain why you are aware at all. They cannot explain why there is a feeling of being you rather than just darkness inside while your brain quietly does its work. And this is the part that truly lands in the chest, they cannot even prove that you have it. They cannot prove that there is anyone home behind your eyes, and neither, when you think about it, can you prove it to anyone else. The most certain thing, the most unexplainable thing, the same thing, let that settle in you like a stone dropping slowly through deep water. Let us pause here for just a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Notice the quiet of the room around you and the gentle fact of your own awareness sitting there, asking nothing of you. When you are ready, we will continue together. So how did we come to see this so clearly? Because for a very long time, people didn't see it at all. They sensed there was something odd about the mind, something that didn't quite fit the rest of the world, but they couldn't put their finger on exactly what the problem was. It took a particular person with a particular gift for naming things to draw the line so cleanly that no one could unsee it afterward. That person was the philosopher I mentioned at the very start, David Chalmers, the one who won the wine. And what he did, more than anything, was give the mystery its name. The story goes that in 1994, Chalmers was a young philosopher, still finding his voice, invited to speak at a conference in Tucson, Arizona, a gathering with the rather grand title, Toward a Science of Consciousness. It was the first of its kind, a meeting of scientists and philosophers and curious minds all trying to take this slippery subject seriously. And Chalmers got up to speak. And in that talk, he drew a distinction so simple and so sharp that it reorganized the entire field around it. The following year, in 1995, he wrote it down in a paper with a wonderfully plain and honest title, Facing Up to the Problem of Consciousness. And he gave the mystery a name that has stuck ever since. He called it the hard problem of consciousness. Now the name is doing something clever, and I want to unfold it slowly because it's the key that unlocks everything else tonight. When Chalmers said the hard problem, he was setting it against what he called the easy problems. And that word, easy, is a little joke, a little wink. He didn't mean these other problems were simple. He meant something quite specific. Let me try to make it plain. Think of all the things your brain does. It takes in light through your eyes and somehow sorts the world into colors and shapes and edges. It discriminates, it tells one thing from another. It takes the flood of information pouring in from your senses and pulls it together into one smooth picture. It integrates. When something happens, it can fire off a report about it. You can say, I see a red apple, I feel cold, that hurt. And it controls your behavior, sending the signals that make your hand reach out, your legs walk, your mouth speak. Discrimination, integration, reporting, control. These are the things the brain does, and Chalmers called the problem of explaining these the easy problems. Not because they're trivial. Some of them are fiendishly complicated, and scientists could spend lifetimes on a single one. He called them easy because, in principle, we know what kind of answer would explain them. They're problems about function, about mechanism, about what does what and how. Think of it like a very, very complicated clock. Imagine you found a clock so intricate that you'd need 100 years to trace every gear and spring. That would be hard work, exhausting, painstaking work. But it wouldn't be a mystery. You'd know the whole time what you were looking for. You'd know that if you just kept going, kept tracing the gears, you'd eventually understand how the hands move. There's a path. There's a kind of answer waiting at the end of it. That's what Chalmers meant by easy. We know the shape of the solution, even if the solution is a long way off. Sooner or later, with enough patience, cognitive science will figure out how the brain discriminates and integrates and reports and controls. Those gears can be traced. But then there is the other problem, the hard one, and it is a problem of a completely different kind. Here it is, as gently as I can put it. All of that functioning, all the discriminating and integrating and reporting. Why is any of it accompanied by experience at all? Why isn't it all just happening in the dark? Do you see the shift? You could imagine a machine that takes in light, sorts it into colors, and says out loud, I see red. A camera hooked up to a computer could do something like that. The information goes in, gets processed, a report comes out. And we would never imagine for a second that the camera feels anything, that there is a felt redness happening somewhere inside the camera, that there is something it is like to be that camera looking at the apple. We'd assume naturally that it's all dark inside, just processing, just gears turning, no inner light. So why aren't you like that? Your brain takes in the light, sorts it, processes it, makes you say, I see red. All of that is the easy problem, the gears, the mechanism, the function. We can imagine tracing every step. But on top of all that mechanism, there is also a feeling. There is the actual lived, undeniable redness of the red, the warm, glowing quality of it that you experience. The brain isn't just sorting wavelengths in the dark. The lights are on. There is someone home, watching. And that extra thing, that inner light, that feeling that rides along on top of all the machinery, that is what no one can explain. Why is the processing accompanied by experience? Why isn't your brain just a very clever camera doing all its work with nobody home? Why is there something it is like to be you? That is the hard problem. And you can feel, I hope, why it's hard in a way that's different from the clock. Or with the clock, you knew what kind of answer you were hunting for. With this, we don't even know what an answer would look like. We can trace every gear, and at the end of all the tracing, the question is still standing there, untouched. Why does any of this feel like anything? Let me give a name to the thing that's so hard to explain, because it has one, and the name is rather beautiful. Philosophers call these felt qualities of experience qualia. One of them is a quale, many of them are qualia. The word comes from the Latin qualis, which simply means of what kind. Of what kind? As in, what kind of thing is this experience? What is its felt character? The modern use of the word was popularized by a philosopher named C.I. Lewis all the way back in 1929, and qualia are everywhere in your life. They are your life, really. The redness of red is a quale. Not the wavelength, not the light, but the felt redness itself, the way it appears to you, the taste of coffee in the morning, that specific, bitter, warm taste. That's a quale. The sting of pain when you stub your toe. Not the nerve signal racing up your leg, but the actual hurtfulness of the hurt, the way it feels. That's a quale. The smell of rain on warm earth. The sound of a familiar voice. The particular blue of the sky on a clear day. Every one of these is a quale, a felt quality, a little piece of the inner light. And here's the thing about qualia. You can describe everything around them. You can describe the wavelength of red light, exactly in numbers. You can describe the chemical compounds in coffee. You can describe the nerve fibers that carry pain. You can describe all of the physical stuff, all of the gears completely. And none of that description ever touches the felt quality itself. You could read every fact about the wavelength of red to a person who had never seen, and you would not have given them the redness. The redness lives somewhere the description cannot reach. This is the crux of the whole mystery, and another philosopher gave it a name too, and a name that's worth holding on to tonight. His name was Joseph Levine, and in 1983 he wrote a paper called Materialism and Qualia, and in it he named the heart of the problem. He called it the explanatory gap. The explanatory gap. I love that phrase because it's so honest. It admits there's a gap, a place where the explanation runs out. Let me try to make the gap real for you with the cleanest example there is: pain. We understand pain physically very well when you touch something hot. Special nerve endings in your skin fire off a signal. That signal races up your nerves into your spinal cord, up to your brain. Particular regions of your brain light up. Chemicals are released. We can map this whole pathway. We can watch it happen on a scanner. We can describe in complete physical detail everything that occurs in your body when you feel pain. And Levine's point, the explanatory gap, is this. After all of that, after the complete physical story, there's still a question left over. Why does any of that feel like anything? Why does that particular pattern of nerves firing come with the awfulness of hurting? We've explained the mechanism perfectly. We have not explained even a little why the mechanism is accompanied by a feeling. There's a gap between the physical facts and the felt experience, and no amount of physical detail seems to close it. Or take the redness one more time, because it's the cleanest of all. Imagine we had a perfect, complete map of your brain at the exact moment you look at a ripe red strawberry. Every neuron that fires, we know it. Every chemical that's released, we've measured it. Every connection that activates, we've charted it. We have in front of us the total physical story of seeing red. Nothing left out, every gear accounted for. Now look at that complete map and ask the simple question. Where in all of this is the redness? Where in this map of cells and chemicals and electricity is the warm, glowing quality of red that you actually experience? Point to it. You can't. The map tells you which neurons fire when you see red. It does not tell you and cannot tell you why that firing is accompanied by the felt redness rather than by nothing at all. You could know which neurons fire completely and still not have explained the redness. That is the explanatory gap made plain. We can map every neuron firing for red and still not explain the redness. The two things sit side by side, the physical map and the felt experience, and there is a chasm between them that no bridge of fact seems able to cross. Let us pause here again, gently. Take a slow, deep breath. There's nothing you need to understand perfectly, nothing you need to hold on to. Just notice for a moment the quiet fact that right now as you breathe, there is an inside to you, a felt sense of being here warm and present, even as the mystery of it deepens. When you are ready, we will continue together. I want you to feel how strange this all is, but in a soft way, the way you might turn a smooth stone over in your hand. Because what we've arrived at is genuinely upside down from what most people expect when they start thinking about this. Most of us carry a quiet assumption. The assumption is that consciousness is a science problem like any other, that it's complicated, sure, but that we're getting there, that somewhere in a laboratory, brilliant people in white coats are slowly closing in on the answer, and one day there'll be a headline and we'll finally know that it's a matter of better scanners and more time. That's the natural assumption. It's the assumption Christof Koch made in 1998 when he put up his case of wine. And what we're discovering the deeper we go is that this assumption may be exactly backward. We have the better scanners now, we've had the time. And the answer has not arrived. Instead, the question has only grown sharper, stranger, more vertiginous, the harder the finest minds have looked at it. The map of the brain grew gorgeous and detailed and complete in ways the old scientists could only dream of. And the gap is still there, untouched, gaping, right where Levine pointed to it in 1983. This is why Koch paid the wine. Not because anyone was lazy, not because the scanners failed. The scanners worked beautifully. They mapped everything we asked them to map. They simply mapped the gears. The easy problem, the discrimination and integration and reporting and control. And mapping the gears, no matter how perfectly, never once produced the one thing we most wanted to understand, the feeling, the inner light. The fact of there being something it is like to be you. There's a humility in that, and I think it's a beautiful humility, the kind worth carrying gently into sleep. Here we are, the cleverest creatures we know of, with our telescopes that see to the edge of the universe and our scanners that watch a single thought ripple through living tissue. And the one thing right at the center of every single one of us, the awareness through which we know all of those other things, that one thing remains a complete mystery. We can know the whole world and not know the knower. And notice something tender about where this leaves you tonight. It doesn't take anything away from you. Quite the opposite. The fact that no one can explain your awareness doesn't make your awareness any less real. It makes it more precious, more astonishing. You are walking around, lying there in the dark, carrying the single greatest unsolved mystery in all of science, effortlessly, every moment, without even trying. The thing the geniuses cannot explain, you simply are. You don't have to understand it, you don't have to earn it. It's just yours, this quiet inner light, glowing softly whether or not anyone can ever say why. So this is where we stand at the start of our journey tonight. We have a question. Why are you aware at all? Why isn't it just dark inside? We have a name for it. The hard problem of consciousness, given to us by David Chalmers in that talk in Tucson in 1994, written down in 1995. We have the thing that's so hard to explain, the qualia, the felt qualities of experience, the redness and the sting and the taste, named from the Latin qualis, of what kind. And we have the precise place where the explanation runs out, the explanatory gap named by Joseph Levine in 1983, the chasm between every physical fact about the brain and the simple fact that experience feels like anything at all. And we have a bet lost, a case of fine wine handed over in 2023, a quiet white flag raised by one of the finest neuroscientists alive, admitting that for all our progress, this one had outrun us. But naming a mystery is only the beginning. Over the years, the cleverest people who ever lived didn't just stare at the gap. They built things, strange, ingenious little machines of the imagination, thought experiments designed to make the gap impossible to ignore, to drag it out into the open where everyone could see it plainly. They imagined scientists who knew everything about color and had never seen it. They imagined what it might be like to be a bat, They imagined walking inside a brain grown to the size of a mill, looking for a feeling among the gears. And they imagined the most unsettling thing of all, a being identical to you in every single atom, who feels absolutely nothing at all. It's to those strange and beautiful machines of thought that we'll turn next. And one of them, the one about the being who feels nothing, may be the most quietly disturbing idea you have ever let into your mind, though we will hold it as we hold everything tonight, gently and without fear. But before we step into those rooms of the imagination, let us go back to the very beginning of the trouble and meet the man who gave it its modern name. His name is David Chalmers. And in 1994, at a conference in Tucson, Arizona, with the unhurried name Toward a Science of Consciousness, he stood up and said something that reorganized an entire field. He drew a line. On one side of that line, he placed what he called the easy problems. On the other, alone, he placed the hard one. Now, easy is a gentle joke, and he knew it. The easy problems are not easy in the way that tying a shoe is easy. They are easy only in a single particular sense, that we know more or less what kind of answer would satisfy them. We can imagine getting there. Think for a moment about what your brain is doing right now, even as it begins to settle towards sleep. It is taking in the dim light of the room and sorting it, telling the lamp from the shadow. That is discrimination. It is gathering 100 separate streams, the weight of the blanket, the faint sound of the house, the memory of the day, and weaving them into one seamless moment. That is integration. If someone asked you how you felt, you could tell them. That is reporting. And when you decide to shift your shoulder to let your hand fall open, your body answers. That is control, discrimination, integration, reporting, control. These are the easy problems, and they are genuinely hard work to solve. They have filled libraries, careers, whole institutes. But notice what they have in common. Every one of them is a question about function, about what the brain does, about how the machinery turns one thing into another. And for a question about function, we know what a real answer looks like. You point to the mechanism, you show how the parts move, how the signal travels, how the output follows the input. One day, in principle, every one of these could be fully mapped. The lights of cognitive science are slowly, patiently coming on across all of them. And then there is the other side of the line, the hard problem. And here is the strange and beautiful thing about it. You can imagine answering every single easy problem completely with nothing left over, and the hard problem would still be standing there, untouched. Imagine it. Imagine we built a perfect account of how the brain discriminates red light from green, integrates it, reports it, acts on it, every step explained, every gear accounted for. There is still one question left, and it is a question of a completely different kind. Why is any of that accompanied by an experience at all? Sit with that for a moment slowly. The brain could, in principle, do all of its sorting and reporting and deciding in the dark, like a very advanced machine that processes light without ever seeing anything. There seems to be no reason, no functional reason, no reason of mechanism, why all that activity should be lit from the inside by a felt redness, a felt warmth, a felt anything, and yet it is. You know it is. As you lie here, the world is not happening to you in the dark. It is happening in the soft glow of experience. There is a feeling of being you here now. That is the hard problem, not what the brain does, but why the doing feels like something. Chalmers gave the question its sharpest form in 1994 in that Tucson talk, and then he set it down in writing the next year in a paper with a quietly confident title, Facing Up to the Problem of Consciousness. And the field has not been the same since, because once you see that line, function on one side, experience on the other, You cannot unsee it. You realize that almost everything science had been celebrating belonged to the easy side. The hard side had barely been touched. Let us give the felt thing its proper name, because we will return to it again and again tonight. The name is qualia. We met the word a moment ago. The redness of red. The particular ache of a particular sadness. The taste of something warm on a cold night. The philosopher C.I. Lewis brought the word into modern use back in 1929, drawing it from the Latin qualis, which simply means of what kind. Of what kind is this experience? What is it like? Qualia are the raw, felt textures of being conscious, and they are precisely the thing that the easy problems leave out and the hard problem cannot reach. And here is where another thinker steps forward to put his hand on the exact spot where the explanation fails. His name is Joseph Levine, and in 1983 he wrote a paper with a phrase in its title that has stayed in the language ever since: Materialism and Qualia, the Explanatory Gap. Levine asked us to perform a small, honest experiment in the mind. Suppose, he said, you had the complete physical story of pain, every nerve, every signal, every chemical released, every region that lights up, the whole cascade from the pinprick to the wince, mapped down to the last firing cell. You would have explained completely what pain does, and you still would not have explained why it hurts. That is the gap. Not a gap of missing information. Levine grants you all the information. It is a gap of a different kind. You can have every fact about the firing that happens when you see red, every neuron named, every connection traced, and somewhere between that vast and perfect map and the simple, silent redness you actually see, something is not bridged. The map is complete, and the redness is still unaccounted for. This is why the bet was lost. Christof Koch did not lose because the scanners weren't good enough, or because we hadn't mapped enough of the brain. We had mapped a great deal. He lost because the map, however detailed, sits on one side of Levine's gap, and the felt redness sits on the other. More detail does not close that distance. It only shows you more and more clearly exactly how wide it is. Let us pause here for a moment. There is a woman. Let us imagine her clearly, because her story does something that abstract arguments alone cannot do. It puts a face on the gap and makes you feel its width. She lives in a room, not a small, cramped room, a comfortable one, large enough, with good light and good books and everything she has ever needed to learn. But the room and everything in it is black and white. The walls, the desk, the paper she writes on, the screen she reads from, her own hands, all of it always achromatic. Her name, in the thought experiment, is Mary, and Mary is extraordinary. She is a scientist, the philosopher Frank Jackson, who imagined her in his 1982 paper, Epiphenomenal Qualia, grants her the most generous possible gift. He gives her complete knowledge, not almost complete, not nearly complete, complete. She knows everything physical science will ever be able to say about human color vision. She knows the exact wavelengths of light that correspond to what people call red. She knows which cells in the retina respond to those wavelengths, and she knows the precise sequence of electrochemical signals those cells send along the optic nerve. She knows which regions of the visual cortex become active, and in what order and with what intensity. She knows what happens in the brain when a person reports confidently and correctly that they are looking at something red. She knows it all, every physical fact, every neuron, every signal, every measurable feature of the process, from the light entering the eye to the word leaving the mouth. She has read every paper ever written on the subject. She could write the definitive textbook on color vision, and it would be complete, and it would be accurate, and she has never once seen the color red. Now the door opens. She steps outside for the first time, and someone is holding a red apple. Jackson's question is this: does she learn something new? Think carefully about what that question is asking. It is not asking whether she is surprised. It is not asking whether she has an emotional reaction. It is asking something more precise and more unsettling. Does she, at the moment she sees red for the first time, come to know something she did not know before? Something real, something factual. Despite having already known every physical fact there was to know, Jackson argued yes, she learns what red looks like, she learns what it is like to see red, and if she learns that, if there is a piece of knowledge she gains that was not contained in all the physical information she already had, then not all facts are physical facts. There must be something beyond the physical description, something the physical description left out, and that something is the experience itself. This is the knowledge argument. And for a time, it was one of the most discussed papers in the philosophy of mind. Then something happened that is unusual enough in philosophy that it is worth pausing on. Frank Jackson changed his mind. He did not revise a small point. He did not soften a claim. He abandoned his own argument. He became a physicalist, someone who believes everything about the mind, including experience, is ultimately physical. He concluded after years of reflection that the intuition driving his thought experiment was misleading, that when Mary steps outside and seems to learn something new, she is not gaining a new fact. She is gaining a new ability, the ability to recognize and remember and imagine red, a skill, not a piece of knowledge about a non-physical world. This reversal by the argument's own architect is remarkable. It does not mean the thought experiment failed. It means it was alive enough, contested enough, that even the man who invented it found himself eventually on the other side of it. Mary's room is not a settled proof. It is a window. And what you see through it depends partly on what you bring to the glass. But even if you accept the physicalist response, even if you decide Mary only gains an ability and not a new fact, something remains uncomfortable. You can feel it. When you try to imagine her stepping out into the color for the first time, there is still something there that seems to matter. The feel of what she encounters, the way it arrives in her mind as something immediate and vivid and entirely its own. Whether or not that constitutes a non-physical fact, it is something that the long list of physical facts, however comprehensive, did not seem to capture in advance. That residue is the hard problem, wearing Mary's face. Let us pause here. Take a slow, deep breath. Notice whatever is around you right now. The weight of where you are resting, the quality of the air, the particular quiet, or the particular sounds of this hour. You do not need to analyze any of this. Just let it be present. Just let yourself be here. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is another thought experiment, older than Jackson's but in some ways stranger, and it travels in a different direction. Thomas Nagel wrote it in 1974, and its title is a question. What is it like to be a bat? Nagel begins with a fact that seems simple. Bats are conscious, not in the full, reflective, philosophical way a human being might be, but they are awake, they navigate, they respond to their environment, and there is broad scientific agreement that there is something going on inside. There is, as Nagel put it, something it is like to be a bat. That phrase, something it is like, is the hinge of the whole thing. It became the field's defining shorthand for consciousness, the most economical way to say what a quail is. When we say an organism is conscious, we mean there is something it is like to be that organism from the inside. When we say a rock is not conscious, we mean there is nothing it is like to be a rock. A rock does not have an inside perspective. It has no experience of being a rock. But for a bat, there is a perspective. There is an inside. There is something. What is it like? Here is where Nagel's argument turns, because bats navigate using echolocation. They emit high-frequency sounds and listen to the echoes that bounce back, building a kind of sonar picture of the world around them. This is not just an unusual skill, it is an entirely different mode of perceiving reality. The bat does not see the world the way you see it. It hears it into shape. The spatial information it receives, the texture and distance and movement of objects, comes through a sensory channel that human beings simply do not have. And Nagel asks, can you imagine what that is like? Not the mechanism. He grants you the mechanism. He grants you every physical fact about bat sonar, the frequencies, the timing, the neural processing, the whole apparatus. He's asking something different. Can you imagine what it is like to experience that? Can you picture the inequality of navigating by sound reflection, of the world arriving as a kind of acoustic texture, of space resolving itself through echoes rather than light? Most people, when they try this honestly, find they cannot. They might imagine being blind and moving through the dark. They might imagine the sound of something bouncing off a surface, but that is imagining from inside a human sensory system what it might be like to lack something. It is not imagining from inside bat experience what echolocation actually is. The inequality of that experience, if bats have one, may be permanently inaccessible to us, not because we lack data, but because we lack the equipment. And here is Nagel's deeper point, a complete physical science of bats. Everything there is to know about bat brains, bat neurology, bat sonar, would tell you nothing about the subjective character of bat experience. It would tell you what is happening. It would not tell you what it is like. The gap that Levine named is not just a gap in our current knowledge. It is a gap in what physical description as such can ever reach. Objective facts about mechanisms describe mechanisms. The lived quality of experience is something else, something first personal, something that only the experiencer has direct access to. This is not mysticism. Nagel was not invoking anything supernatural. He was pointing at a structural feature of the problem. We study the world from the outside. Science is, by design, a third-person enterprise. It describes what can be observed, measured, and reported by anyone willing to look in the right place. But consciousness is, by its nature, first person. It is the view from inside, and you cannot get the view from inside by looking from outside, no matter how sophisticated your instruments. That is why a bat may be a mystery that better equipment cannot solve, not because the bat is magical, but because the bat's experience, if it has one, belongs to a category that third-person science was not built to capture. Let us pause here. Take a slow, deep breath. Let the night be around you for a moment. There is nothing to figure out right now, nothing to hold, just the weight of being somewhere and the quiet of listening. When you are ready, we will continue. Now we go back, 300 years back, to a time before neuroscience, before psychology, before any of the equipment we now use to peer inside the brain, and we find that someone already saw the problem with clarity. His name was Gottfried Leibniz, and in 1714, in a short philosophical work called the Monadology, he described something that has come to be known as Leibniz's mill. Here is how he presented it. Suppose, he wrote, that the brain, at the seat of thought and feeling, were enlarged to the size of a mill. Imagine it scaled up until you could walk inside it the way a miller walks through the gears and wheels of a great grinding machine. You step through the door, you walk among the parts. You can see everything. The great rotating wheels, the levers pressing against one another, the cogs interlocking, each pushing the next. in one long, continuous cascade of physical cause and effect. You can follow every movement, you can trace the whole mechanical story from beginning to end, and Leibniz says you would never find a perception there. Not hidden in a corner, not compressed into a particularly intricate gear. Nowhere. No matter how carefully you walked, no matter how long you looked, the grinding of parts against parts would account for all the motion, and there would still be nothing in that vast interior that was, itself, a feeling, a thought, a flicker of the inner light that makes experience what it is. This is Leibniz's mill, a brain the size of a factory, examined from the inside, and still no experience to be found. Take a moment with how old this is. Leibniz wrote this in 1714. He was reasoning about consciousness, about the hard problem, though he did not use that phrase, 3 centuries before David Chalmers gave the problem its modern name, which tells you something. This is not a puzzle that has been lurking in the background waiting for science to catch up. It has been the puzzle, clearly visible, for as long as people have thought carefully about the mind. Science caught up in some remarkable ways. It built tools Leibniz never imagined. It found correlations and mechanisms and mapped the firings of individual neurons. And the puzzle remained. The mill is still empty of feelings, no matter how detailed your map of the machinery has become. The image is worth sitting with because it does something that arguments alone cannot quite do. It puts you inside the problem. When you try to picture walking through a brain the size of a factory, the cells like vats, the connections like cables, everything firing and signaling in its vast physical dance, and then try to find where the feeling would be, you feel the gap that Levine named. Not intellectually, but as a kind of vertigo. There is simply no place to point to. Feelings are not the kind of thing that has a location you could walk to. And that, Leibniz saw, is the strangeness at the heart of it. The mill image is also a useful reminder of what the hard problem is not. It is not the problem of explaining how complex behavior arises from simple parts. That we have made real progress on. It is not the problem of explaining why certain brain processes lead to certain actions or reports. We are making progress there too. It is the problem of why any of that processing is accompanied by anything at all. Why the mill, in addition to grinding, also somehow generates something that it is like to be. And 300 years of thought have not moved us clearly closer to that answer. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Let the quiet be what it is. You do not need to solve anything. You are just listening, and that is enough. When you are ready, we will continue together. And now we arrive at the most vertiginous of these thought experiments, the one that takes the gap Levine named, the mystery Nagel pointed to, the empty mill Leibniz imagined, and turns it toward the person standing next to you. David Chalmers introduced the philosophical zombie in his 1996 book, The Conscious Mind. But the question it poses is as old as any careful encounter with another person. Here is the setup. Imagine a being, call it a P-zombie, short for philosophical zombie, that is physically and functionally identical to a conscious human being. Not approximately identical. Exactly. Atom for atom, neuron for neuron, connection for connection. Every synapse fires in the exact pattern that yours fires. Every muscle moves as yours moves. When this being is poked, the neurons in its pain processing pathways fire in precisely the way yours do when you are poked. When asked how it feels, it says, "It hurts." It says this because the neural circuits that produce that response are identical to yours. It recoils. Its face does what a face does when in pain. And inside there is nothing. Not darkness in the poetic sense, not a suppressed or hidden experience. Nothing, no inner light whatsoever, no redness to the red it reports seeing, no sting to the pain it reports feeling, no texture to the sound it says it hears, just the neural machinery running perfectly, producing all the outputs a conscious person produces, and no one home inside to experience any of it. All dark inside. Chalmers' question is not whether such a being actually exists, it is whether it is conceivable, whether you can coherently imagine it, whether there is a logical contradiction hiding somewhere in the description, because if a p-zombie is conceivable, if there is no internal logical impossibility in the idea of a being physically identical to a conscious human, but with no inner experience, then consciousness is not entailed by the physical facts. The physical facts could all be identical and the experience could simply be absent, which means the experience is something over and above the physical. It is an extra thing not captured in the physical description. This is the conceivability argument, and it has been debated with great intensity ever since Chalmers made it central. The main lines of resistance are worth knowing. The most common physicalist response is to challenge the move from conceivability to possibility. Just because you can imagine something does not mean it is genuinely possible. You can imagine water that is not H2O. You can imagine heat that is not molecular kinetic energy. But those imaginings, philosophers like Kripke showed, are confused. When you examine them carefully, they are not actually imagining the thing itself, but only a superficial description of it. And perhaps p-zombies are the same. Perhaps what seems conceivable is in fact deeply incoherent, and we only think it is conceivable because we have an incomplete grasp of what physical processes actually are. Perhaps consciousness is as necessarily tied to certain brain processes as heat is to molecular motion. And the appearance of a gap is an artifact of our limited understanding, not a real metaphysical gap. This is a serious response. Chalmers takes it seriously. The debate around it is genuine and unresolved. But there is a reason the p-zombie remains such a persistent and discomforting idea. And it has to do with something that is harder to argue away. Something practical and personal and sitting very close. You cannot verify that anyone else is conscious. Think about what you actually have access to when you encounter another person. You have their behavior, their words, the expressions on their face, the things they say when you ask them how they are feeling, the flinch when they are hurt, the smile when something pleases them, the tears when they grieve. You have all of that. And all of that, every single piece of it, is in principle exactly what a p-zombie would produce. There is no test you could run, no question you could ask, no scan you could perform. Everything that counts as evidence of consciousness in another person is a behavior, a report, an output. And outputs are, by definition, what p-zombies produce. The zombie would pass every test you could devise because the tests measure function, and the zombie's function is identical. This is the problem of other minds, and it is ancient. Far older than Chalmers, far older than philosophy as we know it. The zombie thought experiment gives it its sharpest modern edge. Your certainty that the people around you are conscious is not based on proof. It is based on analogy. You know you are conscious. They are like you. Same body plan, same behavior, same kind of brain. So you infer they must be conscious too. The inference is reasonable. It may be correct. But it is an inference, not a direct observation. You have never observed anyone else's inner experience. You have only ever observed your own. Chalmers' p-zombie concept has roots that go back further than his 1996 book. The philosopher Robert Kirk explored similar territory in 1974 with the idea of absent qualia, the possibility that beings like us might be missing the inner dimension entirely. And behind that lies a tradition that reaches back to John Locke in 1690, who wondered, in a passage that has been puzzled over for centuries, whether what you call blue might be what I call yellow, whether my experience of red is genuinely the same as yours, or whether we might have systematically different inner experiences while using all the same words and showing all the same behaviors. This is the inverted spectrum. Suppose that whenever you see something red, you have the inner experience that I would call green. But you have been taught to call it red because that is what everyone calls it, and you have no way to know that the inner quality of your experience differs from mine. We would both pass every test. We would both use the same words correctly. We would both agree that fire engines are red and grass is green. And our inner experiences would be entirely different. Can you rule it out? Most people, when they sit with this question honestly, find that they cannot. There is no behavioral test that could detect the inversion. There is no report you could make that would distinguish your inner red from my inner red. The inner qualities, if they exist, are not directly accessible to third-person inspection, and this is precisely what makes them both so important and so philosophically troublesome. The zombie takes this further. The inverted spectrum asks whether your qualia might differ from mine. The zombie asks whether you might have no qualia at all, and whether I could ever know the difference. Now let us sit with what all four of these thought experiments have done, taken together. Mary's room showed that knowing all the physical facts might not be the same as knowing the experience, that there might be something left over, something felt, that the physical fact do not contain. What is it like to be a bat showed that even a complete, exhaustive, accurate physical account of another creature's sensory system might leave the inner quality of that creature's experience permanently beyond our reach. Not because we lack data, but because experience is first person and science is third person. Leibniz's mill showed that this gap was not new, that a thinker 300 years ago walking through an imagined brain-sized factory saw clearly that no amount of mechanical description would ever land you inside the feeling itself. And the philosophical zombie took the gap and placed it between you and the person beside you. Not as an abstract puzzle about bats or scientists in rooms. As a question about whether, when you look into another person's eyes and sense that something is alive behind them, whether that sense is knowledge or inference, whether the light you see in them is real, or whether they have learned to perfectly simulate a light they do not have. This is not a comforting set of thought experiments. They are not designed to comfort. They are designed to accurately mark the edges of what we know. And what they mark, honestly, is this: you cannot step outside your own experience to verify anyone else's. You cannot get to the inside of another mind by studying the outside of another brain. And no one, in all the centuries this has been thought about carefully, has found a way through that. Let us pause here. Take a slow, deep breath. Let the strangeness settle, not as something troubling, but as something vast. You are resting in the middle of the deepest puzzle there is. There is no urgency. There is nothing you need to resolve tonight. Just let the question be as large as it actually is. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is something worth noticing about how these thought experiments work on us and why they have survived Mary and the bat and the mill and the zombie, when so many philosophical arguments have been written and then forgotten. It is because they do not ask you to follow a chain of logic alone. They ask you to imagine something. They ask you to put yourself in a position and notice what happens. When you imagine Mary stepping outside for the first time, you feel something. When you try to imagine what it is like to be a bat, you feel the limit of your imagination. When you walk through Leibniz's mill and look for the feeling among the gears, you feel the absence. And when you consider the person beside you and ask whether you have genuine knowledge that they are conscious, you feel the vertigo of not quite being able to answer. These experiments work by doing what science cannot do. They bring you to the threshold of the gap from the inside. And this is important, because one of the most common responses to the hard problem, one of the most natural defenses against its full weight, is to say that it will dissolve eventually, that better neuroscience will make it go away the way better chemistry made alchemy go away. That what seems like a deep mystery is really just a current ignorance, and time and instruments will fix it. That response might be right, but the thought experiments are a way of testing it. When you walk through Leibniz's mill, you are not left feeling that better instruments would change anything. The mill is as detailed as you want it to be. That is the point. More detail does not help. The problem is not the resolution of the map. The problem is that the map is one kind of thing, and the territory you are trying to reach, the felt experience itself, is another kind of thing, and no increase in the quality of the map closes that distance. Jackson saw this, Nagel saw it, Leibniz saw it before either of them. And when Frank Jackson looked at his own argument long enough and decided to become a physicalist, when he concluded that the gap was an illusion, that Mary did not really learn a new fact but only gained a new skill, he was making a choice that most people find difficult to fully accept without unease. He decided the argument was misleading, and he may have been right, but the unease, even after his reversal, did not go away. Because the unease is not about the logical structure of the argument. It is about the fact of experience itself, sitting there, vivid and undeniable, waiting for an account that fits. You are having an experience right now. Not just processing information, not just running a biological computation. There is something it is like to be you in this moment, listening to these words in whatever quality of quiet surrounds you. There is a particular felt texture to the hour, the softness or stillness of it, the specific tone of whatever sounds exist or don't exist around you, the weight of lying or sitting or resting in whatever way you are. All of that is what the hard problem is about. The question is not whether it exists. You know it exists. The question is what it is, where it comes from, why there is something it is like to be you at all, instead of just the brain running in the dark, doing everything it does without any inner witness to any of it. And this is why the thought experiments are not just philosophical games. They are pointing at something you already know firsthand. You are the evidence. The experiment is already running. The result is in from the inside. And what is strange is that the inside is the one place the outside cannot reach. Let us pause here. Take a slow, deep breath. There is nowhere you need to be. The hour is yours. Let yourself settle a little more deeply into wherever you are resting, and just for a moment, let the thinking go quiet, and just notice the simple fact of being here, aware and resting and present. When you are ready, we will continue. Mary's Room was written in 1982, Nagel's Bat Paper was 1974, Leibniz's Mill was 1714, Chalmers's Zombie was 1996. Across these centuries, what each of these thinkers was doing was trying to put their finger on the same thing from a different angle, trying to locate with precision where the physical account runs out and the experiential begins. And each of them, in their different way, found the same thing. They found a seam. A place where the description of mechanisms and processes and information flows, however complete, reaches a boundary that it cannot cross, not because we have not yet built the right scanner, but because scanning gives you one kind of thing, and experience is another kind of thing, and the move from one to the other is the move that has not been made. Joseph Levine called it the explanatory gap. Chalmers called it the hard problem. Nagel called it the problem of what it is like. Leibniz saw it as the absence of perception inside the mill. They are all looking at the same tear in the fabric of the explanation, the same place where the account of what is happening stops and the question of what it is like to have it happen begins. What is striking is that none of these thinkers, or not one, was trying to invoke the supernatural. They were not arguing for a soul in any religious sense. They were not saying science is wrong or that the brain is not the organ of consciousness. They were doing something more precise and in some ways more unsettling. They were pointing at a specific structural problem with every third-person account of a first-person fact. They were noting that the categories we use to describe the physical world, mechanisms, functions, information, processes, do not, as a matter of their structure, include the first-person perspective. And the first-person perspective is, in the end, what consciousness is. The inverted spectrum going back to Locke in 1690 is perhaps the most personal version of this, because it asks not about a bat or a scientist in a room or a being made of the same atoms as you. It asks about the specific quality of your particular experience, and whether it could differ from mine in a way that neither of us would ever be able to detect. Whether the redness you have lived with your whole life is the same redness I have lived with mine. We call it the same thing. We point at the same fire engines, but is the inequality the same? You cannot answer this, not with certainty. And the reason you cannot answer it is exactly the reason the hard problem is hard, because the inequality is not accessible from outside. It is only accessible from inside, and each person's inside is ultimately their own. There is something important here. The thought experiments are not just pointing at a theoretical gap, they are pointing at a practical one. The practical gap is this: you are the only person who has direct access to your own consciousness. Everyone else is inferred. Every other mind you believe in, the minds of the people you love, the people you work with, the people you share a world with, you believe in because of analogy, because they are shaped like you and they move like you and they say the kinds of things you would say if you were having the experiences they claim to be having. The inference is reasonable. It is so deeply habitual that it does not feel like inference. It feels like knowledge. But it is inference. The zombie thought experiment does not tell you the inference is wrong. It does not tell you that the people around you are actually unconscious. What it does is make visible the inference you are already making, the one you have always been making, the one that is so automatic it feels like direct perception. It shows you the gap between what you can observe and what you believe, and it asks you to be honest about the width of that gap. And when you are honest about it, it is surprisingly wide. This is not a comfortable conclusion, but it is an honest one. And honesty about the limits of what we know is not the same as despair. It is actually the beginning of a more careful and more accurate understanding of what is going on. You cannot prove your closest friend is conscious. You believe it, with every reasonable justification available to you. But the belief and the proof are different things. What you can prove, the only thing in this whole territory that admits of absolute direct certainty, is your own experience right now as you are having it. That you are aware that there is something it is like to be you in this moment, in this particular quality of the night. That is not an inference. It is the one fact that does not require any argument, because it is present before any argument begins. And it is, if you think about it, the strangest fact there is, the one thing you are most certain of, that you are conscious, that you are here, that there is someone home, is the one thing that no one else can verify. It is the most intimate fact you have, and it is the most public mystery in the world. Let us pause here, take a slow, deep breath. Let the night receive you for a moment. All of these questions of Mary and the bat, and the mill and the zombie, they are not demands on you. They are just an honest look at the size of what you are. The question of your own awareness is the oldest and deepest question there is, and you are resting inside the answer right now. When you are ready, we will continue together. So we have walked through the 4 canonical thought experiments. We have seen the gap from 4 different angles, from the scientist who knew every fact, from the bat whose sonar world is forever beyond our imagining, from the mill that grinds and grinds without producing a single flicker of feeling, and from the being that stands beside you and performs consciousness perfectly from inside an empty dark. And we are still on the edge of the gap, still looking across it. What waits on the other side, the side that asks not just what the problem is, but what the answers might be, is a landscape of serious thinkers who have chosen different routes across. Some say the gap is real and requires a new kind of physics to explain it. Some say the gap is an illusion, and the explanation just needs to be sophisticated enough to reveal that. Some say every particle in the universe carries a faint flicker of experience, and what we call human consciousness is what happens when those flickers combine in vast and intricate ways. Some say the gap may be real and that human minds may simply be too limited to ever close it. Each of these positions has brilliant, careful defenders. None has won, and the shape of that disagreement, the specific texture of where the smartest people in the world cannot reach consensus, is itself a kind of map of the mystery. That map is where we are going next. So let us begin with the position that most people hold without quite knowing they hold it. The position that the brain, given enough time and enough good instruments, will simply explain itself. This is physicalism, or materialism. The labels shift slightly depending on who is using them and what they want to emphasize, but the core commitment is the same. Consciousness is something the brain does. Experience arises from neural activity the way heat arises from friction or light arises from a burning filament. There is no extra ingredient, there is nothing in the room that isn't already accounted for by the physical facts. The mind is the brain, and once we understand the brain completely, the mystery will dissolve, not because we have found something hidden, but because we will see that there was never anything hidden to begin with. This is not a naive position. It is held by serious, rigorous people who have spent decades thinking carefully about it. And in its more precise philosophical forms, it has a long and technical history. One of its earliest rigorous versions is called type identity theory. The idea associated with philosophers like J.J.C. Smart and Herbert Feigl in the middle of the 20th century is that mental states just are brain states, that a specific type of pain, for example, is identical to a specific type of neural firing pattern. Not that they run alongside each other or that one causes the other, but that they are literally the same thing described in two different vocabularies. The way we might say the morning star and the evening star are the same object, Venus, seen at different times from different perspectives. A later and more flexible version is functionalism. On this view, what makes a mental state the kind of mental state it is, and what makes pain pain rather than joy, is its functional role. It's the state that gets caused by tissue damage, causes wincing and withdrawal, causes desire for the damage to stop. If something plays that causal role, whatever its physical substrate, that thing is pain. This opens the door, at least in principle, to the idea that something very different from a biological brain could have mental states, if it plays the right functional role. A computer, perhaps, or something we haven't built yet. Both of these positions are sophisticated, and both face the same core challenge, which is the one we have been circling all along. Even if you establish that pain is identical to a particular neural state, or that pain is whatever plays the pain role, you haven't explained why that neural state or that functional role is accompanied by any feeling at all. You've told us which physical facts correlate with pain. You haven't told us why those physical facts feel like anything. That is still the gap. Still waiting. And then there are the thinkers who decided that the problem with physicalism was not that it was too ambitious, but that it wasn't ambitious enough in the right direction. That it was trying to explain experience away rather than explaining it properly, and the result was always an explanation that left the most important thing out. But there are also thinkers who took the opposite path, who looked at the same gap and decided the problem wasn't physicalism's ambition, but rather a hidden confusion inside the question itself. These are the illusionists. The most famous of them is Daniel Dennett. And it is important to say clearly before going further that Dennett is not a simple or casual thinker. His 1991 book, Consciousness Explained, is dense, serious, and relentlessly argued. He was one of the most influential philosophers of mind of the 20th century. When he says something about consciousness, it deserves careful attention, even if, perhaps especially if, it initially sounds outrageous. What Dennett says essentially is this: the hard problem feels hard because we are asking the wrong question. We are asking why our experiences have these ineffable felt qualities, these qualia, as if qualia were a real, well-defined thing that our theory needs to account for. But Dennett's argument is that when you look closely at what qualia are supposed to be, they start to dissolve. The intuition that there is something it is like to see red, over and above the brain's processing of red wavelength light, over and above all the functional and discriminatory and behavioral aspects, is itself a product of how the brain models its own states. It is an introspective report about experience, not a direct window into experience. And introspective reports can be wrong. He proposes what he calls heterophenomenology, a method of taking people's reports about their inner lives seriously as data without assuming those reports accurately describe some inner theatre. What feels like an ineffable private quality, Dennett argues, is really the brain's own representation of its processing, a kind of narrative the brain constructs about itself. There are no qualia sitting behind the narrative. The narrative is what there is. This move is sometimes called the Cartesian theatre objection. Descartes imagined, what most of us implicitly imagine, that there is somewhere inside us a place where it all comes together, where the lights are on, where someone watches the show of experience. Dennett says there is no such theatre, there is no central audience. There is just the ongoing, distributed, parallel activity of a brain generating and editing representations of itself and its environment. What feels like a unified, luminous inner world is the story the brain tells about its own activity, and that story doesn't require any additional magic to explain. He famously said that his book should have been titled Consciousness Explained Away, and that the public pushback to the actual title of Consciousness Explained showed that people wanted the mystery preserved, not dissolved, which is fair, because for most people, Dennett's account leaves something out that feels absolutely central. It explains how we come to report and represent experience. It does not address the felt quality of the experience itself. When you press on this with Dennett, he tends to say that what you're pointing at, the extra ineffable something, is precisely the thing his account shows doesn't exist in the form you imagine it. The intuition that there must be more is itself the thing to be explained, not honored. Keith Frankish, a philosopher who has developed this position carefully in more recent years, his key paper, Illusionism as a Theory of Consciousness, appeared in 2016, uses the term illusionism. The idea is precise. Phenomenal consciousness is real as a representation. There genuinely is a state your brain is in when you see red. What is illusory is the property we attribute to that state, the property of being ineffably, irreducibly felt, of having a quality that cannot be captured in functional or physical terms. The brain represents its own states as having these mysterious additional properties, but the properties themselves are the illusion. The hard problem is solved, or rather dissolved, because the thing the hard problem was asking us to explain never had the nature we thought it had. There is something almost vertiginous about this, and it is worth pausing inside it for a moment. The illusionist is saying, you are not wrong that there seems to be something it is like to be you. The seeming is real. The brain really does represent its experiences as having felt qualities. But seeming is itself a physical, functional process. And what seems to be an ineffable extra ingredient is the brain's own mislabeling of its states. You are, in a very specific sense, wrong about the nature of your own experience. Not about whether you're having it, but about what kind of thing it is. Take a slow breath with that. The question this raises, the one that tends to make illusionism feel unsatisfying to many people, is something like this. Even if I grant you that my introspection is unreliable, even if I grant you that I'm wrong about the nature of what I'm experiencing, isn't there still something it is like to be me right now, having whatever this experience actually is? And isn't that something the raw fact that there is an inside to my existence? Precisely what needs explaining. Dennett and Frankish would say that feeling of there being a raw inside is exactly what illusionism explains. It's the brain's self-model. The self-model produces the conviction of interiority, but pressing for something behind the conviction is like pressing for the snark behind the word snark. The pressure is itself the phenomenon. Many brilliant people find this convincing, many brilliant people do not, and the fact that the debate is genuinely open and that neither side has produced an argument the other must accept is itself part of what we are tracking tonight. Let us rest here for just a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Let the room hold you. You don't need to resolve this tonight. These are the thoughts that some of the sharpest minds in the world have been turning over for decades, and they have not resolved them either. You are in good company simply by sitting with the question. Notice whatever has softened, and when you are ready, we will continue together. Now we turn to the other end of the spectrum. If illusionism represents the move that says the gap is less real than it appears, a product of confusion about our own nature, then property dualism represents the move that says the gap is exactly as real as it appears, and that the framework we use to understand the world needs to be widened to accommodate it. David Chalmers, who gave us the hard problem in the first place, is the most prominent defender of property dualism in contemporary philosophy. And it is worth understanding precisely what he is and is not saying. He is not saying what René Descartes said. That is important. Descartes, in his Meditations of 1641, proposed what is called substance dualism, the view that mind and body are two entirely different substances, two different kinds of thing entirely. The body is a physical thing extended in space, governed by the laws of matter. The mind is a non-physical thing, a thinking substance, res cogitans, distinct from matter. And somehow in a human being, these two radically different substances interact. The problem with this, which was spotted almost immediately, is the interaction question. How does a non-physical mind push a physical body? If the soul has no mass, no charge, no spatial location, how does it move the arm? Descartes' answer, and one does feel a certain sympathy for him, was that the interaction took place in the pineal gland, a small structure in the center of the brain. He chose it partly because it's one of the few midline structures in the brain, not doubled like most others, and he thought the soul needed a single seat. But this just restates the problem. Whatever the pineal gland is doing it physically, with neurons and chemicals. A non-physical soul cannot simply reach in and give it a nudge without there being some kind of causal bridge, and that bridge would itself need to be explained. Descartes never solved this. Nobody has. And substance dualism has largely been abandoned as a serious position in academic philosophy of mind, not because it's obviously wrong, but because the interaction problem has no good answer. What Chalmers proposes is different. He does not say there are two substances. He says there is one substance, the physical world, but that it has two kinds of property, physical properties like mass and charge and position, and phenomenal properties like the felt redness of red, the particular quality of this moment of awareness. These properties are distinct, neither reduces to the other, but they are both features of a single world. And they are linked, he argues, by psychophysical laws, fundamental laws of nature connecting physical processes to phenomenal states, the way physical laws connect mass to gravitational attraction. We do not yet know these laws, we may not even know how to look for them, but positing their existence is, for Chalmers, the honest response to a gap that cannot be closed by physical explanation alone. This position has a kind of intellectual honesty to it that many people find compelling. It takes the intuition seriously. It doesn't wave the felt quality away. It says the felt quality is real. It is distinct from the physical process, and explaining their connection requires something more than what current physics offers. That something more is not a ghost in the machine. It is a new kind of natural law. The obvious question is whether this amounts to progress or to a more elegant way of labeling the mystery. Critics, particularly those of the physicalist and illusionist persuasion, tend to say that psychophysical laws are placeholders for an explanation we don't have, and calling them fundamental is just a way of stopping the regress without actually stopping it. Chalmers' defenders say that physics routinely posits fundamental laws without being able to derive them from something more basic. Why should the connection between matter and mind be different from the connection between mass and gravity? Brute, foundational, not further reducible. The debate continues, but there is another position on the spectrum, one that, when most people encounter it for the first time, sounds too strange to be serious. It is serious. Panpsychism is the view that consciousness, or something like consciousness, or the building blocks of consciousness, is a fundamental and ubiquitous feature of the natural world, not just of brains, not just of animals, of matter itself, rocks, rivers, electrons. Each one on this view carries some minimal, almost unimaginably faint flicker of experiential something. Now, before you move away from this, let me say what panpsychism is not claiming. It is not claiming that your coffee mug is daydreaming. It is not claiming that a rock has hopes and fears. The experiential properties posited at the level of fundamental particles would be so minimal, so alien, so far from what we recognize as human consciousness, that calling them experience at all requires a kind of conceptual stretching. They are proto-experiential. The seeds, perhaps, of what becomes rich, conscious experience when matter is organized in sufficiently complex and integrated ways. The reason serious philosophers take this view seriously is that it offers a genuinely different approach to the combination problem in the opposite direction from the standard story. The standard story says we start with purely physical stuff that has no experience, and somewhere in the assembly, experience arises. Panpsychism says, why assume we start with purely physical stuff that has no experience? What if experience, in its most minimal form, is there all along at the fundamental level, and what brains do is organize and combine it into the kind of experience we recognize as human consciousness? Galen Strawson, a British philosopher, made what became an influential argument for panpsychism in a 2006 paper called Realistic Monism. His core move was this: if you are a physicalist who believes consciousness is real, genuinely, not as an illusion, and you believe it is physical, then you need to explain how non-experiential physical stuff gives rise to genuine experiential states. But this is, he argued, the most radical emergence imaginable. It would be something arising from nothing relevantly similar to it. And that kind of emergence, genuine experience from genuinely non-experiential stuff, is at least as mysterious as anything panpsychism proposes. If you find panpsychism implausible because it attributes experience to matter, Strawson says, you should find physicalist emergence at least equally implausible. You are not avoiding the mystery by rejecting panpsychism. You are just locating it differently. Philip Goff, a philosopher who has been one of the most prominent voices in the contemporary revival of panpsychism, titled his 2019 book, Galileo's Error. His argument is historical and structural. When Galileo inaugurated the scientific revolution, he made a foundational methodological choice. He excluded the qualitative from science. Galileo's framework, which became the framework of all modern physics, describes the world in purely quantitative terms: mass, velocity, charge, position. The redness of red, the fragrance of a flower, the warmth of sunshine on skin, these are excluded from the scientific description by design. Galileo was not making a mistake in doing this. He was making science tractable. But the consequence, Goff argues, is that we built a framework that was always going to leave consciousness out, not because consciousness isn't real, but because we deliberately excluded the qualitative from the ground floor. Panpsychism, in his view, corrects this foundational exclusion by acknowledging that the qualitative, consciousness in its most minimal form, is part of the furniture of reality. This revival is genuine and academically serious. In surveys of professional philosophers, panpsychism draws a non-trivial proportion of votes, enough that it can no longer be dismissed as a fringe curiosity. But it faces a major internal problem, the combination problem named by the philosopher William Seeger. Here is the difficulty. Even if we grant that an electron has some tiny proto-experiential quality, and that every particle of your brain has some tiny proto-experiential quality, it is extremely hard to explain how those tiny qualities combine to produce the rich, unified, single stream of human consciousness. Consciousness as we experience it is unified. Right now, you experience the weight of your blanket, the sound of the night, the sense of your own breathing, the flow of words in your mind. And you experienced all of this as one thing, a single, unified field of awareness. How do billions of micro-experiences, each presumably separate, add up to that one thing? It is not obvious that experience is the kind of thing that combines in the way matter combines. 2 electrons have 2 units of charge. Do they have 2 units of proto-experience, or 1 unit of something else? Or does the whole framing break down? Panpsychists have worked hard on this problem. The answers are varied and technically sophisticated. None has achieved widespread acceptance. Combination is the wound in the theory, the place where even its defenders admit the framework has not yet fully healed, and so the debate continues, as it has and as it may continue for a long time. But there is one more position on the spectrum we need to visit tonight, a position that is perhaps the strangest of all, because it is neither optimistic nor pessimistic about consciousness. It is, in a very specific sense, pessimistic about us. This is mysterianism, and its most prominent defender is the British philosopher Colin McGinn. McGinn's paper, Can We Solve the Mind-Body Problem, appeared in 1989, and his answer, stated plainly, though argued with great care, is no. Not because the problem doesn't have a solution, but because the solution is permanently inaccessible to human cognition. Let that settle in. His argument goes like this. We know that consciousness arises from the brain. We know this not because we understand how, but because the evidence is overwhelming. Damage the brain, and you damage or alter consciousness. Stimulate the brain, and you produce experiences. The connection is undeniable. So there is, McGinn assumes, a real physical explanation of how the brain produces consciousness. The explanation exists. It is out there, in the structure of reality, waiting to be found. But, and this is the move, there is no reason to assume that human cognitive faculties are adequate to find and comprehend every truth about the natural world. Our minds evolved to handle the problems of life on the African savanna. Predators, food, social relations, tool use. They were not designed by evolution to penetrate the deepest structures of reality on every topic. There are almost certainly truths about the universe that are cognitively closed to us, permanently and in principle beyond our ability to comprehend, not because those truths are paradoxical or mysterious in themselves, but because the cognitive equipment we have is not suited to grasping them. McGinn argues that the mind-body problem, the question of how neural activity gives rise to experience is likely one of these closed truths. The solution exists. It is, in principle, a natural, non-mysterious solution. But the shape of that solution is one that human minds cannot hold. He offers an analogy that has stayed with me. Think of a dog trying to understand arithmetic, not the simplest counting. Some animals can handle rudimentary numerical distinctions, but the full, formal structure of arithmetic, with its proofs and infinite recursion and abstract relationships, a dog cannot grasp this. It is not that arithmetic is too mysterious for any mind to grasp. It is that the dog's cognitive equipment is not the right kind of equipment for that kind of understanding. The dog is cognitively closed to arithmetic. McGinn suggests we may be the dog. We may be cognitively closed to the explanation of consciousness, not because consciousness is inexplicable, but because our particular kind of mind, for evolutionary reasons, lacks the right cognitive faculties to grasp what connects neural firing to felt experience. This position is called mysterianism, but it is actually a deeply naturalistic view. McGinn is not saying consciousness is supernatural, or that it will never be explained, or that a different kind of mind couldn't in principle explain it. He is saying that the specific cognitive equipment carried by Homo sapiens may have a principled limit here, a limit that is not a failure of intelligence or effort, but an architectural fact about what we are. There is something both humbling and quietly liberating about this, if you sit with it. It means the failure to solve the hard problem is not a sign that something has gone wrong with the project of understanding. It may be a sign that we are up against the edge of what our particular kind of mind can do. Not the edge of reality, not the edge of explanation, just the edge of us. And perhaps there is a kind of peace in that. Perhaps there is a kind of dignity in recognizing the shape of your own limits honestly, rather than pretending they don't exist or breaking yourself against them in frustration. Though of course not everyone accepts mysterianism, many philosophers resist it strongly, arguing that there is no principled reason to declare the problem cognitively closed before we have even developed the right conceptual tools to approach it. The history of science is full of problems that seemed permanently beyond human comprehension and turned out not to be. Predicting cognitive closure in advance, rather than from within the closed zone, may be premature. How would you know you were cognitively closed to something before ever reaching the limit? Isn't it possible that the next conceptual revolution, the kind that happened with general relativity or with quantum mechanics, might open the door we cannot currently see? McGinn acknowledges this but remains unconvinced. He thinks the nature of the gap between the neural and the phenomenal is specific enough that we can already see its contours, and its contours do not fit the shape of what human conceptual revolutions typically close. Let us pause once more and breathe. Take a slow, deep breath. Let the weight of these positions settle without trying to choose between them. The physicalist who says experience is just the brain doing its work. The illusionist who says the mystery is a misfired self-report. The property dualist who says the gap is real and requires new laws of nature. The panpsychist who says the building blocks of experience are woven into matter from the very beginning. The Mysterian who says the answer exists, but our kind of mind may never hold it. 5 serious positions, 5 sets of brilliant defenders, no consensus. Notice how it feels to hold that without resolution, not trying to pick, not feeling the need to settle it tonight, just resting inside the question, the way you might rest inside a room you've never been in before, letting your eyes adjust to the dark. When you are ready, we will continue together. What is striking when you lay all these positions side by side is that they do not divide neatly along the lines you might expect. It is tempting to think of this as a debate between science and philosophy, or between materialism and spirituality, or between the head and the heart. But that is not the shape of it. Every position on this spectrum has both philosophical and scientific defenders. Every position takes the evidence from neuroscience seriously. The debate is not about whether the brain matters. It is about what the brain is, what kind of thing it is, what kind of facts it generates, and whether those facts exhaust the story. Daniel Dennett was not dismissing neuroscience. He was proposing that neuroscience, interpreted carefully, leaves no room for an extra phenomenal layer. Chalmers is not opposing neuroscience. He is arguing that neuroscience, however complete, will always describe the correlates of experience without explaining the experience itself. Philip Goff does not reject physics. He argues that physics, as currently formulated, was deliberately designed to exclude the qualitative, and that this exclusion, useful for 4 centuries of discovery, is now the source of the impasse. These are not science versus religion arguments. They are arguments about the scope and completeness of the framework we use to understand reality. And they are far harder to resolve precisely because they are not arguments about facts. They are arguments about what kind of framework makes facts intelligible, which means, in a strange and vertiginous way, that they are arguments about us, about what kind of understanding we are capable of, what kind of explanation satisfies us, and what we are even asking for when we ask why there is experience at all. And that brings us, finally, to where all 5 positions converge, not in their answers, but in the specific puzzle they are all trying to answer. Every one of these thinkers, from Dennett to McGinn, from Chalmers to Goff, agrees on this much. The relationship between physical processes and subjective experience is the central unsolved problem. They disagree about why it's unsolved, about how deep the unsolvability goes, about what solving it would even look like. But they all agree that there is a genuine explanatory target, that the question of why any physical system is accompanied by experience is a real and important question that current science and philosophy has not answered. And they all agree, i.e. even Dennett in his way, that the question arises because of something genuinely puzzling about the structure of reality as we find it. The world as described by physics is a world of processes, of causes and effects, of forces and fields and particles, and somewhere in that world something is happening that seems different in kind, not just more process, but felt process. Process that is, from the inside, something. Why? That question does not have a home in any of our current frameworks. It falls through the cracks between neuroscience and philosophy, between the third-person account and the first-person fact, between the explanation and the explained. And the fact that it falls through the cracks is not a failure of attention. The smartest people alive have been paying attention to it for decades, for centuries, in different forms. The crack is structural. It is in the shape of our knowledge. There is something quietly extraordinary about that. The one thing you are most certain of, and more certain than you are of the external world, more certain than you are of other people, more certain than you are of anything your instruments have ever measured, is that you are aware. That there is right now an inside to your existence. And that one thing, the most immediate, most undeniable, most intimately known fact in your entire life, is the one thing that none of our explanatory frameworks can fully account for. Not because we haven't tried, not because we lack the data, but because the question seems to be asking something that our frameworks were not built to answer. Something about the difference between a world described from outside and a world experienced from within. Something about the irreducible, unsubstitutable, utterly private quality of what it is to be here. You are lying in the dark right now. You are aware of something. The weight of the night, the slow rhythm of your own breathing, the quiet movement of thoughts. You are inside something that no scan has ever photographed, no theory has fully explained, no argument has dissolved. You are inside the mystery itself. And all of these thinkers, the eliminativist who says even your belief in qualia may be a conceptual mistake, and the panpsychist who says the flutter of experience you carry has echoes all the way down to the smallest particle, and the Mysterian who says the truth is there but you cannot reach it. All of them, in their different ways, are trying to honor the fact that what you are right now is the deepest puzzle there is. Not a puzzle that makes you small, a puzzle that makes you, in some quiet and undeniable way, enormous. So let us now turn to the scientists, because here is the thing that surprises most people when they first encounter this field. The scientists did not make the problem smaller. They mapped the brain with extraordinary precision, with tools of a delicacy that would have seemed like magic a century ago, and they watched the mystery grow larger, not smaller, with every new piece of data. This is not a failure of science. It is, in a way, the greatest possible compliment to the seriousness of the question. The story of how modern neuroscience encountered the hard problem begins, in many ways, with one of the most famous scientists of the 20th century. Francis Crick, the same Francis Crick who, together with James Watson, in 1953, helped unlock the double helix structure of DNA, spent the final decades of his life not on genetics, but on consciousness. He pivoted. He decided that the mystery of subjective experience was the most important unresolved problem in science, and he went looking for it inside the brain with the same tenacity he had once brought to the molecule of life. Crick and his longtime collaborator Christof Koch introduced the now standard framework in 1990, the idea of the neural correlates of consciousness. 4 words that seem, on the surface, almost disappointingly modest. A neural correlate of consciousness is simply the minimal neural activity sufficient for a specific conscious experience to occur. You see red, and somewhere in the brain, a particular pattern of firing is taking place. That pattern is the neural correlate of your red. Find the correlate, the logic goes, and you have found where the experience lives. But notice what that framework does and what it does not do. It tells you which neurons. It does not tell you why those neurons firing is accompanied by anything at all. It tells you the address. It does not explain why anyone is home. Crick became particularly fascinated in his later years with a thin sheet of neurons buried deep in the brain called the claustrum. The claustrum is easy to overlook. It is small, tucked underneath the cortex, like a forgotten note slipped under a door. But Crick believed it might be doing something important. He described it as a kind of conductor of the neural orchestra, the structure that might be binding together the separate streams of sensory information, the sound and the sight and the touch, into a single, unified experience. His final paper on the claustrum was published in 2005 after his death. The question it raised has never been definitively answered. The claustrum may be relevant, it may not be, we do not know. And the deeper point is that even if it is the conductor, even if we could say with certainty that the claustrum is responsible for unifying experience, we would still face the same question. Why does a conductor produce felt unity rather than simply processed unity? Why is the binding accompanied by the sense that there is someone inside listening? The address still doesn't explain the resident. This is the wall that every neuroscientific approach eventually runs into, and it is not a wall built of ignorance. The tools available to modern researchers are extraordinary. Functional MRI can track blood flow through the brain in real time, lighting up regions of activity as a person thinks, feels, imagines, grieves. Electroencephalography can read the electrical rhythms of millions of neurons firing together in waves. Single electrode recordings can listen to individual neurons one at a time as they respond to stimuli. We have brain imaging at resolutions that would have seemed science fiction to researchers working just 50 years ago. And yet, the scan shows activity. It does not show awareness. This gap, the same explanatory gap Joseph Levine named back in 1983, does not close as the imaging improves. If anything, it becomes more vivid. because the better you can see the mechanism, the more startling it becomes that the mechanism by itself does not account for the experience. You can watch a person's visual cortex respond to a red object, and the neurons firing in precise, measurable patterns. And the redness, the warm, immediate felt redness of it, remains outside the picture entirely. Several major scientific theories have been built to bridge this gap. They are serious, mathematically sophisticated, empirically grounded, and they have produced some of the most heated arguments in contemporary science. The first, and in many ways the most influential in terms of empirical traction, is global workspace theory. Bernard Baars proposed the core idea in 1988, and it was later developed and neuralized, given a specific brain architecture, by the neuroscientist and cognitive scientist Stanislas Dehaene. The theory goes like this. At any moment, your brain is running many parallel processes. Your heart rate is being regulated. Your body temperature is being monitored. Your eyes are tracking a dozen things at once, most of which you are not consciously aware of. All of this happens in the background, specialized and local. Consciousness, on this account, is what happens when information breaks out of its local processing and gets broadcast globally, sent out across a widespread frontoparietal network, the front and the top of the brain working together in a way that makes the information available to many different systems at once. Think of it as a central stage or a meeting room where information is projected so that the whole organization can access it. When the light hits that stage, Baars and Dehaene say, the information becomes conscious. This is an elegant theory. It connects to a great deal of data. You can find the signatures of global broadcasting in the brain, the specific patterns of neural ignition that distinguish things you are aware of from things you are not. It explains why consciousness feels like a spotlight, why you can attend to only one thing at a time with full awareness, why some information passes through without registering. It is genuinely illuminating. But here is the question. Global workspace theory does not fully answer. Why is global broadcasting accompanied by experience? Why does information being made widely available to the brain systems produce the feeling of anything? Why isn't it just broadcasting, useful, functional, mechanically impressive, with the lights off? You can build the global workspace in a diagram. You can describe its architecture. And the hard problem quietly stands in the corner, still waiting. Then there is integrated information theory. This is the framework developed by the neuroscientist Giulio Tononi beginning in the early 2000s, and it takes a genuinely radical approach. Tononi's proposal is not that consciousness is the byproduct of certain kinds of neural activity. His proposal is that consciousness is integrated information, not correlated with it, not produced by it, identical to it. He gives this integrated information a name and a mathematical symbol, phi, written as the Greek letter F. Phi is a measure of how much information a system generates as a whole, above and beyond what its individual parts generate separately. A system with high phi is one where the whole is genuinely more than the sum of its parts, where the information you need to describe what the whole system is doing cannot be fully recovered from the information about each piece in isolation. Tononi argues that phi is consciousness. The higher the phi, the more consciousness there is. This is a striking move because it has striking consequences. It predicts that consciousness comes in degrees, not just a light that is either on or off, but a dimmer switch that can sit anywhere along a spectrum. A human brain in deep, dreamless sleep has lower phi than a human brain in vivid, dreaming sleep. A sleeping person has less consciousness than a waking one. A simple creature has less consciousness than a complex one. None of that sounds especially surprising. But then the theory goes further. It predicts that any system with integrated information, any system with phi above zero, has at least a flicker of experience, not metaphorically, literally. A thermostat, if you push the logic, might have some minimal, vanishingly small phi, not enough to matter, but not zero. The theory predicts it would have the most infinitesimal trace of experience, not because it is complex, but because even its simple integration of two states, on or off, warm or cold, generates a tiny excess of unified information. And more disturbingly, Tononi's mathematics predicts that certain simple grid-like circuits, kind you might find in a very basic computer, could in principle have higher phi than a human brain. They would be, by the theory's own logic, more conscious. Not smarter, not more capable, more conscious. This is the kind of prediction that makes scientists uncomfortable, not because it is obviously wrong, because it is very hard to test and very difficult to dismiss. Integrated information theory has attracted fierce criticism from within the scientific community. In September of 2023, a letter signed by 124 researchers publicly characterized the theory as pseudoscience. 124 names. That is not a casual dismissal. That is a coordinated act of scientific pushback, and it tells you that the debates in this field are not polite disagreements over details. They are genuine, passionate, sometimes acrimonious fights over the foundations of the whole enterprise. The pseudoscience charge, it should be said, is itself contested. Many of the researchers who study integrated information theory regard it as a legitimate, testable scientific framework. The argument is not whether the theory is right, almost no one thinks it has been confirmed, but whether it is the kind of thing science can, in principle, confirm or refute. Whether it makes predictions sharp enough to be tested. Some say yes, 124 scientists signed their names to saying no. Meanwhile, the same year that letter was circulating, the results were being finalized from something called the Cogitate Consortium, an adversarial collaboration between IIT and global workspace theory. The idea behind an adversarial collaboration is unusually honest for science. You take two competing theories, you get their proponents together, you design the crispest possible experiments that would distinguish between them, and you run those experiments with everyone watching. No hidden methodologies, no quiet shelving of inconvenient results. You commit in advance to publishing whatever comes out. The Cogitate Consortium involved researchers on both sides of the debate and ran for years. When the results were published in 2023, the answer was, neither theory cleanly won. Predictions from both frameworks partly failed. The data did not hand a decisive victory to anyone. This is what the frontier of consciousness science looks like right now. Not convergence, not closing in. Genuine, open-ended uncertainty with two of the best developed theories, each failing to fully account for the data, and a large portion of the scientific community openly arguing about whether one of them is even science at all. The field is alive in the way that matters. Contested, energized, unsettled, reaching. And then there is a third approach, one that has come to feel quite different from the others, though it engages with some of the same data. Anil Seth is a neuroscientist at the University of Sussex, and in his 2021 book, Being You, he offered a framing that has captured a great deal of attention. Seth argues that the brain is not a passive recorder of reality, it is a prediction machine. At every moment, the brain is generating its best guess about what is out in the world and what is happening in the body, and it uses incoming sensory signals not as the raw material of perception, but as corrections to a prior prediction. You do not experience the world as it is. You experience the brain's model of the world, constantly being updated, constantly being refined, but always a step removed from whatever is actually out there. Seth calls conscious experience, perception, the felt sense of the world, a kind of controlled hallucination. The word hallucination is meant to be provocative, but also precise. A hallucination is a perception with no external cause. What Seth is pointing at is that all perception even ordinary everyday seeing and hearing and touching, is the brain generating an internal construction and then using the world to calibrate it. The control is what distinguishes perception from a dream or a psychotic episode. The calibration is happening in real time, the predictions are being corrected continuously, but the generation, the model making, is always there, always prior. This framing connects to the work of Carl Friston, a neuroscientist whose free energy principle has become enormously influential in computational neuroscience. The free energy principle is mathematically dense and takes a long time to fully unpack, but the heart of the idea is something like this. Living systems survive by minimizing surprise. Not emotional surprise, but statistical surprise. The gap between what they predict will happen and what actually happens. The brain is constantly trying to shrink this gap by updating its model of the world and by acting in the world to bring events into line with predictions. Friston's framework tries to unify perception, action, and attention under a single mathematical principle. It is ambitious in scope. What Seth and Friston both contribute to the consciousness debate is a shift in emphasis. Instead of asking where consciousness is in the brain, these frameworks ask what the brain is doing, what function consciousness serves, how it is constructed, why it has the shape it does. The brain's model is not a neutral photograph, it has a point of view, it has a perspective. And understanding what kind of machine builds perspectives from the inside might get us closer to understanding why there is a perspective at all. But, and you may be noticing a pattern here, these frameworks still leave the hardest part of the hard problem standing. Even if we fully understand that the brain is a prediction machine, even if we can map its generative models with perfect precision, we still face the question that will not dissolve. Why does running a predictive model feel like anything? Why is there something it is like to be a controlled hallucination? The machine could, in principle, generate all the same predictions, perform all the same calibrations, update all the same models, without the lights ever coming on inside. David Rosenthal's higher-order theories offer yet another angle. Rosenthal's proposal is that a mental state becomes conscious when there is a higher-order representation of it, when another mental state, aimed at the first one, registers its existence. Consciousness, on this view, is a kind of internal perception. You are aware of a pain not just because the pain signal is there, but because you have a meta-representation of the pain, a mental state that is, in some sense, watching the first mental state happen. When you are running on autopilot, when your driving becomes habitual and your mind wanders, many processes are occurring in your brain that are not accompanied by higher-order representations of themselves. Those processes are, on this account, not conscious. When something rises to the level of meta-representation, consciousness switches on. It is a sophisticated framework, and it faces its own version of the gap. Where, in all this internal perception, does the felt quality come from? Where is the redness in the meta-representation of redness? Where is the sting in the higher-order view of pain? The question keeps finding the gap. And now let us step back from the theories for a moment and look at some of the evidence that has, quietly, been reshaping how researchers think about what consciousness actually is and where it lives. In the late 1970s and through the 1980s, neuropsychologists Roger Sperry and Michael Gazzaniga were studying a group of patients who had undergone a very particular surgical procedure, the severing of the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum is the thick band of nerve fibers connecting the left and right hemispheres of the brain. In some severe cases of epilepsy, cutting this band can reduce the frequency and intensity of seizures. It is a drastic intervention. What Sperry and Gazzaniga discovered in the patients who had undergone it was extraordinary. Sperry would later receive the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for this work in 1981. When you present information to only one side of a split-brain patient's visual field, you are presenting it to only one hemisphere. The right visual field sends information to the left hemisphere. the left visual field sends information to the right hemisphere. In a normal brain, the corpus callosum carries information between the two sides almost instantaneously, so that both hemispheres know what the other saw. In a split-brain patient, that connection is gone. What Sperry and Gazzaniga found was that when they showed a picture to the right visual field, and therefore to the left hemisphere, which is typically the one that controls language, the patient could say what they saw. But when they showed a picture to the left visual field, only the right hemisphere saw it. The patient said they saw nothing. Yet their left hand, controlled by the right hemisphere, could pick up and manipulate the object. The knowledge was there. The words were not, because the words lived in a hemisphere that had not seen the picture. More unsettling still, the left hemisphere and the verbal, reporting hemisphere would sometimes confabulate. It would generate explanations for the left hand's behavior that were completely fabricated because it genuinely did not know what the right hemisphere had been shown. It would make up a story that felt true to the verbal self because the verbal self had no access to what had actually happened. The implication is quietly staggering. Inside a single skull following a single surgery, there appear to be two streams of awareness, two centers of information processing that are no longer unified. The patient does not experience themselves as two. They experience one continuous self. But the experimental evidence suggests something more divided is happening inside. Gazzaniga spent decades probing this, asking what it reveals about the nature of unified consciousness, whether what we call the self is a narrative constructed by the left hemisphere's interpreter, a story told after the fact by the part of the brain that has words. Now let us go somewhere even more unsettling. The question of what it means to be aware when you cannot move, cannot speak, cannot demonstrate any sign to the outside world that anything is happening inside you. In 2006, the neuroscientist Adrian Owen was working with patients who were in apparent vegetative states following brain injuries. Patients who showed no behavioral signs of awareness, no response to commands, no purposeful movement, no communication. From the outside, the lights appeared to be off. Owen and his colleagues placed one of these patients in a brain scanner and asked her to imagine playing tennis. Just imagine it. The motor cortex, the region involved in planning and coordinating movement, lit up in precisely the same pattern it would light up in a healthy volunteer imagining the same thing. Owen then asked her to imagine walking through the rooms of her home. A different pattern, this time involving spatial processing regions, again matching what a healthy volunteer would produce. This woman had no behavior. She was, by every clinical standard available at the time, in a vegetative state. And yet inside her brain, something was following the instructions. Something was generating the imagined tennis game on command. Something, in other words, was there. The implications for our understanding of consciousness and for the ethics of how we treat patients in these states are profound and still reverberating. Owen's 2006 study in the journal Science did not prove that all patients in vegetative states are conscious. It proved that behavioral measures of consciousness are radically incomplete, that the absence of behavior is not the same as the absence of awareness, that the lights might be on when we have no way of knowing from the outside. And this connects, in the most personal and uncomfortable way, back to the problem of other minds. You can never directly verify that anyone other than yourself has an inner life. You infer it from behavior, from reports, from the assumption that others are like you. But the inference is exactly that, an inference, not a direct observation. Never a direct observation. Owen's patient had no behavior to provide the inference. And yet, as far as the brain scanner could tell, something was home. Then there is anesthesia. Every day, in operating theatres around the world, people are put to sleep with remarkable precision. The anesthesiologist adjusts the dose, the monitoring continues, and a person who was present and aware becomes, within seconds, somewhere entirely else. Not merely unconscious in the ordinary sense of sleep. Gone. Their body is there on the table, being operated on. But they, whatever they are, whatever the presence of them consists of, are absent. No pain, no time, no self, no experience. And then, with further adjustment, they return. This is one of the most astonishing and quietly taken for granted facts in all of medicine. We can turn consciousness off and back on again with a chemical. We can erase the lights and restore them. We do it every day, in every hospital, as a routine procedure. And we do not fully understand at the level of why, at the level of what is happening to experience itself, how it works. We know which chemicals are effective. We know what brain states correspond to anesthetic depth. We know that certain agents seem to disrupt the global broadcasting that Bernard Baars and Stanislas Dehaene describe, interrupting the wide area communication that might be the signature of conscious awareness. We know that other agents seem to act on specific receptors in specific regions. We have a great deal of mechanistic knowledge, but why the lights go out, why the presence, that irreducible first-person there-ness, simply stops? That is not a question our current theories can answer with precision. You can describe every chemical change that the anesthetic produces, every shift in neural activity, every alteration in global connectivity, and you will not have explained where you went while it was happening. The gap does not close, it watches from the corner of every experiment, every scan, every carefully designed test. And now we come to the moment in 2023 that this narration has been building toward since the very first sentences. You may remember the wine. In 1998, the neuroscientist Christof Koch made a bet with the philosopher David Chalmers. Koch bet a case of fine wine that within 25 years, by 2023, science would have identified the neural correlate of consciousness. Not a complete theory of why experience exists. That would have been too much even for Koch. But the neural basis of consciousness, the specific mechanism, the specific region or network or process that is responsible for generating conscious experience, would be found, mapped, and understood well enough to settle the matter. 25 years. Koch was confident. He was one of the most distinguished neuroscientists in the world. He had spent decades working on exactly this problem, alongside Crick. He had watched the field grow and develop tools that would have seemed impossible to earlier generations. He had seen the neural correlates of consciousness research program produce landmark after landmark. He believed the problem would yield. In 2023, Christof Koch publicly conceded the bet. He paid the wine. The neural correlate of consciousness had not been identified. The leading theories were still fighting. The adversarial collaboration had produced results that neither theory could fully claim. 124 researchers were publicly calling one of the most mathematically sophisticated theories in the field pseudoscience. And the gap, the explanatory gap Levine named, the hard problem Chalmers defined, the wall every neuroscientific approach eventually hits, remained. Koch's concession was not bitter or dismissive. He remained committed to the research. He said the field had learned enormously. He said the problem was harder than he had imagined. He said he believed that science would eventually prevail. But the wine was paid, and the 25 years had passed, and the problem was still there. There is something important in that moment, not a failure, not a defeat for science, something more instructive than that, a reckoning with the scale of the question. The tools improved, The understanding of neural mechanisms advanced in ways that genuinely transformed what we know about the brain. And the mystery, rather than dissolving, became more clearly itself, more precisely identified, more sharply bounded, more honestly acknowledged. The map got better, but the map was never the territory. So let us gather now as this long night of thinking begins to find its edge, as the questions that have been circling all this time settle into something quieter. Think back to where we began. A neuroscientist and a philosopher in 1998 making a bet over wine. One of them certain that the tools and the decades ahead would be enough. The other, in some sense, betting on the stubbornness of the question. By 2023, the question had won, not because science is inadequate, but because this question may be unlike the others, may be asking something that our usual methods of finding the address do not reach, because what is being asked for is not an address at all. Think of the mill. Leibniz, in 1714, imagining a brain the size of a factory, walking its corridors, looking at the gears and levers and moving parts, seeing every mechanism with perfect clarity, and finding nowhere in all that machinery a single feeling. 300 years before fMRI, before single electrode recording, before the global workspace and integrated information theory, he had already placed his finger on the exact location of the difficulty. The mechanism does not contain the experience. You can describe the mill completely and still not explain why there is something it is like to stand inside it. Think of Mary, sealed in her room, knowing everything a physicist and a neuroscientist and a neurologist could teach her about the color red, every wavelength, every retinal response, every neural pathway from the eye to the visual cortex, every measurement that has ever been taken of the experience of redness, and then stepping out of the room and seeing red for the first time. Learning something, Jackson argued, that all the knowledge had not taught her, the felt quality of the thing, the quale, the redness of red. Frank Jackson later changed his mind, became a physicalist, concluded that the intuition was misleading, but even that reversal, even the fact that the argument's own author came to question it, does not dissolve the question, it sharpens it. Because the debate about whether Jackson was right or wrong is still, in the end, a debate about the same gap. Whether Mary learns something or not, the question of what the felt quality is, how it relates to the physical story, remains. Think of the bat. Thomas Nagel in 1974 asking what it is like to navigate the world through sonar, to locate moths in the dark by the echoes of your own cry. You can know the anatomy, you can know the physics of echolocation, you can know every neural response that a bat's auditory system makes to incoming signals, and you still might not know, might never know what it is like to be the bat in that moment, what the felt texture of its experience is from the inside. There is something it is like, and whatever that something is, it may be constitutionally inaccessible to a human imagination shaped by different sensory equipment. This is not merely an interesting fact about bats. It is a statement about the structure of experience itself. Experience is always a view from somewhere. It always has a perspective. And some perspectives may not be translatable, may not be fully imaginable from the outside, no matter how much you know. Think of the zombie, that being perfectly constructed, perfectly identical, atom for atom and neuron for neuron, who moves through the world and responds and says ouch and laughs and cries, and inside whom, the theory proposes, there is nothing, no experience, all dark, no one home. You cannot detect the difference with any external instrument. You cannot prove to me that you are not one, and I cannot prove it to you. This is not a horror story. It is not meant to be frightening, but it is meant to locate something real and vertiginous in the foundations of what we know, or think we know, about the presence of other minds. Every relationship you have, every conversation you are part of, every moment of connection you feel with another person rests on an inference, a reasonable inference, a natural inference, an inference you could not live without, but still an inference. You have never had direct access to anyone else's experience. You have had their behavior, their words, their faces, their tears, their laughter. And from all of that, you have inferred the presence of an inside. That inference may be correct, almost certainly is, but the zombie thought experiment is a way of asking, how do you know? What exactly is doing the inferring? And what would it mean to be wrong? And now, at the end of all this, let us sit with the place we have arrived. There is no consensus. That is not a failure of the people who have been working on this. It is a feature of the question. The genuinely serious thinkers, the eliminativists and the illusionists and the property dualists and the panpsychists and the mysterians, are not disagreeing because some of them are confused. They are disagreeing because the question is genuinely hard, in a way that few questions in the history of human inquiry have managed to be. The usual methods of settling debates, running the experiment, checking the math, examining the evidence, keep running into a boundary. Not because the evidence is hidden, but because what is being looked for may not be the kind of thing that evidence by itself can fully disclose. The unsettledness itself is the point. Not as a reason to give up, not as a reason to retreat into mystery for its own sake, but as an honest report from the frontier. This is where the most careful thinkers have arrived. This is what the tools have found. This is the shape of the thing, and here is what that means for you, lying here now, inside the quiet. You are the only thing in the universe you have ever had direct access to. Not the world out there, which your brain models and predicts and constructs into experience. Not other people, whose inner lives you infer from what they give you. Not the abstract entities of physics or mathematics or chemistry. Just this. Just the fact of being aware right now. The weight of the dark around you. The slow rising and falling of your chest. The thoughts that come and go without invitation. This is what they are all talking about, not a theory, not a concept. This, every scan, every thought experiment, every philosophical argument, every late-night wager over wine, it all circles back to the same irreducible center. The fact that there is something it is like to be you, right now, in this room, in this body, in this moment. That fact is where the whole mystery lives. Not somewhere exotic, not in a laboratory or a conference hall or a philosophy seminar. Here, in the ordinary immediate presence of your own awareness, and that awareness is in the end what no one can prove to anyone else. If we ever build a machine that speaks, not just processes language, but says, in whatever terms are available to it, that it is conscious, that there is something it is like to be running these calculations, that there is an inside to its existence, we will face the same question we have always faced. How would we know? What test would settle it? What evidence would be sufficient? The machine could pass every behavioral test. It could report every internal state with perfect accuracy. It could produce all the outputs we associate with consciousness, and we would still face the zombie problem from the other side. We would still not be able to look inside. We have never been able to look inside, not into machines, not into bats, not even into the person lying beside us in the dark. This is not a counsel of despair. The inquiry continues, the theories are being tested, the adversarial collaborations are being designed and run, the scans are getting better, the mathematics is getting richer, the conversation is getting more precise. Christof Koch paid his wine and went back to work. Chalmers keeps formulating and refining the argument. And Neil Seth keeps proposing that the controlled hallucination might eventually reveal its own mechanism. Philip Goff keeps arguing that panpsychism deserves the serious philosophical attention it is finally beginning to receive. The work goes on because the question is worthy of it. Because the question is one of the few that touches the very foundation of everything. But tonight, at the edge of sleep, you do not need to resolve it. You do not need to choose between illusionism and property dualism, between the global workspace and integrated information. You do not need to know whether a thermostat has a trace of experience or whether the claustrum is the conductor of the neural orchestra. You do not need to know whether Frank Jackson was right the first time or right the second time. You do not need to know what it is like to be a bat. What you have, what you are, is something that all of these frameworks are reaching toward from the outside. You are the thing they are trying to explain, the one fact they all begin from and cannot get behind, the one piece of evidence that is available to you completely and to no one else at all. You are aware. Right now, in this darkness, breathing slowly, listening without effort to the quiet, you are aware. And that awareness, so familiar and so obvious that you barely notice it, so constant that you carry it the way you carry the feeling of your own heartbeat, is the most astonishing and least understood thing in the known universe. We have met tonight a neuroscientist who bet on the tractability of this mystery and paid his wine. We have met a woman in a black and white room, knowing everything about red and still somehow not knowing it. We have met a mill the size of a factory, where all the gears are visible and no feeling is. We have met a bat navigating darkness by sound. We have met a being made of the same atoms as you, with nothing inside. We have met the gap, and that quiet, stubborn, illuminating gap between the description of a mind and the experience of having one. None of them gave us the answer. All of them honored the question. And the question in the end is the most intimate one there is. It is not about the brain in general or consciousness in the abstract. It is about this particular awareness, the one that is here right now, reading night like water, going slowly under. You cannot prove it to me, and I cannot prove mine to you. But between us, in that space where proof runs out and presence begins, something is undeniably happening. Let that be enough for tonight. Be wise in the simplest way there is tonight, and rest.